Picture this, you're at your anniversary dinner when your father-in-law stands up with a special gift, but instead of congratulations, he hands you divorce papers. Your husband's new fiancée is already wearing your wedding jewelry. You sign the papers in shock, humiliated in front of everyone you know, but then your best friend stands up with an envelope that changes everything. What she reveals will leave the entire family speechless and turn this nightmare into the ultimate revenge. This is Rebecca's story, and you won't see the twist coming. If you love stories of incredible comebacks, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think happens next. Subscribe for more unbelievable stories that will keep you hooked. The morning of our second anniversary began with hope, floating through our Connecticut home like sunlight through lace curtains. I woke before dawn, my heart racing with excitement that made sleep impossible. 2 years. Jake and I had reached our second milestone, Chupin, and tonight we would celebrate with everyone who mattered most. I slipped from bed carefully, not wanting to wake my husband, and padded barefoot to our kitchen. The house felt different in these pre-dawn hours, filled with possibility and anticipation. Through our bay window, I could see our wedding photos on the mantel, catching the soft glow of street lamps. There we were, frozen in that perfect moment when we promised each other forever. Jake appeared in the doorway just as I plated his favorite breakfast: blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, turkey bacon crispy exactly how he preferred, fresh orange juice I had squeezed by hand the night before. The kitchen smelled like contentment itself. "Happy anniversary," I said softly, expecting him to cross the room and kiss me like he had on our first anniversary. Instead, he paused in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Yes," he replied simply. 2 years. Something in his tone made me look up from the pancakes, but he had already turned his attention to the morning newspaper. The familiar rustle of pages filled the space between us, creating a barrier I could not understand. Jake had always been quiet in mornings, but this silence felt different, heavier, more deliberate. I dismissed my uneasiness as anniversary nerves. Men handled celebrations differently than women. I reasoned, where I felt excitement bubbling up like champagne, he probably felt the weight of expectation. The afternoon found me at the Blackwell estate, transforming their formal dining room into the perfect setting for our celebration. My mother-in-law, Victoria, directed my efforts with her usual mixture of criticism disguised as helpful suggestions, but there was something different about her energy today. She practically vibrated with excitement as we arranged flowers and polished silverware. "You seem particularly happy today," I observed, carefully placing the roses in the crystal vase that had been her wedding gift to us. "Oh, Rebecca," Victoria replied, and her smile was broader than I had ever seen it. "Tonight is going to be such a special evening, such a relief. Really, we have been anticipating this moment for quite some time." My father-in-law Richard nodded from his leather armchair, where he observed our preparations with the satisfaction of a general surveying his troops before battle. 2 years provides adequate time for evaluation," he said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he used when making pronouncements about family matters. "Tonight we celebrate making necessary decisions." Their words felt warm and inclusive, as if they were finally welcoming me fully into their family circle. I had worked desperately for this acceptance, enduring countless family dinners where subtle criticisms were delivered with surgical precision. Every holiday gathering where I smiled through pointed questions about grandchildren. Every social event where I felt like I was auditioning for a role I believed I had already earned through marriage. The dining room transformed under our combined efforts, becoming a showcase worthy of the celebration I imagined we were creating. Fresh flowers filled every surface with the scent of roses and baby's breath. Crystal glasses caught the afternoon light and sent tiny rainbows dancing across the pristine white tablecloth. As I stepped back to admire our work, I felt that familiar surge of pride that came with successful entertaining. Tonight would be perfect. Tonight would finally prove my worth to the Blackwell family. Tonight would mark the beginning of my true acceptance into their world. But as Victoria smiled at me with unusual warmth, I caught something in her eyes that I could not quite identify. It looked almost like pity. The signs had been accumulating for weeks, like hairline cracks in a foundation that I had chosen to ignore rather than examine. 3 weeks earlier, I had discovered the first piece of evidence while organizing our paperwork for tax season. Buried beneath insurance documents and utility bills, I found a cell phone statement that did not belong to our family plan. My hands shook as I studied the itemized charges, hundreds of text messages and phone calls to a number I had never seen before. The dates and times told a story that made my stomach clench with growing dread. Late-night conversations when Jake claimed to be sleeping beside me. Afternoon calls during work hours when he supposedly could not be reached. Weekend texts exchanged while he sat in our living room claiming to check work emails. The frequency had increased dramatically over the past 3 months. When Jake came home that evening, I was waiting in our kitchen with the phone bills spread across the counter like evidence in a criminal trial. "Can you explain this to me?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Jake's face went through rapid transformations. Confusion, recognition, guilt, and finally defensive anger. "You went through my personal papers. They were mixed in with our joint tax documents," I replied. "I was not snooping, I was organizing." "That is work-related," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "My boss requires a separate line for certain projects, confidentiality issues. Your boss requires you to text at midnight." Jake's jaw tightened. "You are being paranoid, Rebecca. This kind of suspicious behavior is exactly why our marriage has problems." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Our marriage had problems. This was news to me, though apparently not to him. "What problems? Jake, I do not understand what is happening here." "Everything has to be about you, does not it?" His voice rose with frustration that seemed to have been building for months. "You question everything I do, everywhere I go, everyone I talk to. It is suffocating." He grabbed his keys from the counter and headed for the door. "I need air. I need space. I need to not be interrogated in my own home." The front door slammed with finality, leaving me alone with the phone bill and the crushing realization that my husband was keeping secrets that required professional-level deception to maintain. 2 days later, the grocery store encounter added another piece to the puzzle. I was selecting vegetables for dinner when I noticed a young woman staring at me with uncomfortable intensity. She was beautiful in that effortless way that made me immediately self-conscious about my own appearance. "You must be Rebecca," she said, approaching with obvious nervousness. "I am sorry. Do we know each other?" "I am Amber," she replied, her hands trembling slightly. "I work with Jake. He mentions you sometimes." Jake rarely discussed his colleagues with me, and he certainly had never mentioned anyone named Amber. Her nervousness seemed disproportionate to a casual grocery store encounter. She kept glancing around as if she expected someone to catch us talking. "He told me about your anniversary party," Amber continued. "It sounds like it will be lovely." This struck me as particularly odd. Jake had been reluctant to discuss our celebration, claiming he preferred private moments to public displays. Why would he share details with a coworker he had never mentioned? How thoughtful of him to talk about our marriage at work, I said carefully, studying her face for clues. Amber's smile faltered. "Oh, yeah, he does not really discuss your marriage. He talks about other things, personal things." She paused, seeming to realize she had revealed too much. "I should go. It was nice meeting you, Rebecca." She hurried toward the exit with obvious urgency, leaving me standing in the produce section with questions multiplying in my mind. Personal things. What personal things would Jake share with a beautiful young coworker that he could not discuss with his wife? The weekly dinner at the Blackwell house the following Sunday provided another layer of understanding about my precarious position in this family. What had once felt like mild criticism now revealed itself as a systematic evaluation. "Margaret's daughter just had the most beautiful baby," Victoria announced as we sat down to her perfectly prepared roast. "Such a blessing for their family. Grandchildren bring such joy." She glanced meaningfully at my flat stomach. "The Johnsons are expecting their second grandchild," Victoria continued relentlessly. "And the Pattersons just welcomed their third. It seems like everyone our age is enjoying the fruits of successful marriages." Richard joined the assault with surgical precision. "Successful marriages typically produce children within the first year. It demonstrates compatibility, shared values, biological fitness." I tried to redirect the conversation to safer topics, but Victoria persisted with observations about family legacy and the importance of continuing bloodlines. Her words were carefully chosen to wound while maintaining plausible deniability. Jake sat through these exchanges in complete silence, neither defending me nor redirecting the conversation away from my apparent failures. His passive participation in my humiliation was perhaps more devastating than his parents' active cruelty. Through the thin walls, I could hear them discussing my inadequacies as if I were a faulty appliance they were considering replacing. 2 years should have been adequate time, Richard was saying. Perhaps the problem is more fundamental than we initially believed. Perhaps, Victoria replied. Jake's voice was too quiet to distinguish words, but his tone suggested agreement rather than protest. When I returned to the table, the conversation had moved to safer topics, but the damage was done. I understood now that my position in this family was conditional, probationary, subject to performance metrics I was apparently failing to meet. The phone call from my mother came that Thursday evening while I stirred soup that would go uneaten because Jake was working late again. Her voice carried the worry that only mothers can perfectly calibrate. Rebecca, honey, you sounded so tired during our last conversation. Are you sleeping enough? Eating properly? I am fine, Mom, just busy with anniversary planning. Jake missed Easter dinner with us, and Christmas felt strained. Is everything all right between you two? How could I explain that my husband was becoming a stranger, that his family treated me like a disappointing employee, that I was discovering evidence of deceptions I could not yet fully understand? We are fine, I lied. Just the normal adjustments of married life. Rebecca. My mother's voice carried the authority of someone who had raised 3 children and survived 35 years of marriage. You know you can tell me anything, if you need help, if you need to come home for a while, if you need anything at all. The offer of refuge was both comforting and terrifying. It meant she saw what I was trying so hard to hide. I will visit soon, I promised, knowing I was avoiding her perceptive questions. I love you, sweetheart. Remember that you deserve to be happy. After she hung up, I stood in my empty kitchen, wondering when happiness had become something I had to remember I deserved rather than something I naturally expected. The medical appointment took place just 48 hours before our anniversary dinner. My best friend Grace had insisted on driving me to Dr. Patterson's office. Her enthusiasm about finally getting definitive answers both comforting and overwhelming. The fertility clinic occupied the 3rd floor of a gleaming medical building, its sterile corridors lined with motivational posters featuring smiling mothers and chubby babies. The irony was not lost on me, surrounded by images of successful pregnancies while documenting 2 years of failure. Just think, Grace whispered as we waited in the reception area. By Thursday, we might have the answer you have been hoping for. The forms felt like confessions written in medical terminology. How many months had I been trying to conceive? 24. Had I experienced any pregnancies, successful or otherwise? Was I currently experiencing marital stress that might impact conception? I stared at that question for a full minute before checking the box marked sometimes. Dr. Patterson was a kind woman in her 50s who had delivered half the babies in our town. Her examination room was painted in soothing pastels, but nothing could soften the clinical reality of what we were investigating. Tell me about your stress levels, Dr. Patterson said during the examination, her tone gentle but probing. Normal, I suppose. The usual pressures of married life. Are you happy in your marriage, Rebecca? The question hung in the air between us like accusation. Grace squeezed my hand from her chair beside the examination table, and I realized that my hesitation before answering had revealed more than any words could have. Yes, I finally replied, but even I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. The blood draw felt like my last hope being extracted through a needle. Each vial represented another chance for my body to redeem itself, to prove that I was worthy of the name I carried. The results will be ready by Wednesday, Dr. Patterson said. We will call with the findings. Grace held my other hand during the procedure, her fingers warm and steady while mine trembled with nervous energy. As we left the clinic, I wondered if those test results might arrive in time to change whatever announcement Richard was preparing to make. Perhaps positive news could salvage a marriage that felt increasingly precarious with each passing day. The confrontation with Jake 3 nights after the medical appointment shattered what remained of my illusions about our relationship. I approached him in our bedroom as he prepared for sleep, armed with brochures about fertility treatments and desperate hope that medical intervention might bridge the growing chasm between us. Jake, I have been thinking about what Dr. Patterson said. There are options we have not explored yet, treatments that might help us conceive. His response was immediate and devastating in its coldness. Maybe we are not meant to have children together. Rebecca, maybe this is our bodies telling us something we should listen to. What are you saying? I am saying that perhaps this marriage was a mistake from the beginning. Perhaps we have been trying to force something that was never meant to work. I stared at this stranger who wore my husband's face but spoke with the voice of someone who had already departed from our relationship emotionally. Is there someone else I saw? Jake. His silence stretched between us like a guilty verdict. I think I should sleep in the guest room tonight, he finally said. We both need space to think about what we really want. That night marked the beginning of a new phase in our marriage, one where we lived as strangers sharing a house, maintaining appearances while privately acknowledging that something fundamental had broken beyond repair. The morning of our anniversary arrived with deceptive beauty. Sunlight streamed through our bedroom windows. Birds sang in the oak trees lining our street, and the weather promised to be perfect for our evening celebration. If I had not known better, I might have thought the universe was conspiring to make this day special. Instead, I felt like I was preparing for my own execution. Grace arrived early to help with final preparations, her arms laden with flowers in a mysterious envelope she clutched protectively to her chest. Her enthusiasm seemed forced, as if she were trying too hard to maintain normal energy levels. Are you ready for tonight? She asked, but something in her voice suggested she already knew I was not. I think so, I replied, though my hands shook as I arranged the roses she had brought. The Blackwells seemed excited about their surprise. Grace studied my face with the penetrating gaze of someone who had known me since college. Rebecca, are you sure you want to go through with this dinner? We could always cancel, claim you are sick. Cancel our anniversary celebration, Grace. I have been planning this for weeks. Besides, Richard and Victoria would never forgive me. Maybe that would not be such a bad thing, she muttered. But when I asked her to repeat herself, she just shook her head and squeezed my shoulder. The afternoon brought a parade of deliveries, flowers that I had not ordered, wine that seemed excessive for our guest list, and a catering truck that arrived with enough food to feed twice as many people as we had invited. Mrs. Blackwell ordered the additional items, the delivery man explained when I questioned the quantities. Said it was going to be a very special evening. Jake spent the day in his office, claiming he needed to finish important work before the party. Through the closed door, I could hear him making hushed phone calls that ended abruptly whenever I walked past. His behavior reminded me of someone preparing for a job interview rather than celebrating his marriage. When he finally emerged to get dressed, his face was pale and his hands trembled as he knotted his tie. We moved around each other in our bedroom like strangers, avoiding eye contact and conversation. The easy intimacy that had once characterized our private moments had disappeared entirely. Jake, I said as he adjusted his collar in the mirror. Is everything all right? You seem nervous. He looked at me through the reflection, and for a moment I saw something that might have been regret flash across his features. I just want tonight to go well, he said finally, for everyone involved. The phrasing struck me as odd. Why would he say everyone involved rather than for us or for our marriage? But before I could question him further, he grabbed his wallet and keys and announced he was leaving early to help his parents with final preparations. I will meet you there, he said, not bothering to kiss me goodbye. As his car pulled out of our driveway, I stood at our bedroom window watching the man I had married disappear into the distance. Something told me that when I saw him again tonight, everything would be different. Grace returned as I was putting on my makeup, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing an expression I could not quite read. Dutch courage, she announced, pouring 2 glasses of champagne despite the early hour. For whatever tonight brings. You are acting very mysterious, I observed, accepting the glass she offered. Tonight is going to be full of surprises, she replied, but her tone suggested they would not all be pleasant ones. We drove to the Blackwell estate in Grace's car, the familiar route taking us through neighborhoods where other families were probably enjoying normal weekday evenings without drama or hidden agendas. As we pulled into the circular driveway, I could see guests already arriving, their cars forming an impressive display of wealth and social status. The Blackwell house looked magnificent in the golden hour light. Its colonial architecture and perfectly manicured gardens creating the impression of old money stability. Tonight, those same elements felt more like a fortress designed to keep outsiders in their proper place. Rebecca, Grace said as she turned off the engine, whatever happens tonight, remember that you are loved. Remember that you have people who will always stand by you, no matter what. Her words carried an ominous weight that made my stomach clench with fresh anxiety. Grace, you are scaring me. What do you think is going to happen? She looked at me with eyes that held secrets I was not yet ready to hear. I think, she said carefully, that tonight is going to change everything. The moment I stepped through the Blackwell's front door, I knew something was fundamentally wrong. The energy in the house felt charged with anticipation, but not the joyful kind that should accompany an anniversary celebration. Instead, it reminded me of the atmosphere before a thunderstorm, when the air grows heavy and electric with impending chaos. Richard greeted me with unusual effusiveness, his embrace lasting several beats too long, while his eyes held mine with uncomfortable intensity. Rebecca, my dear daughter-in-law, he said, the endearment rolling off his tongue with theatrical precision. Tonight will be such a special evening, such a memorable evening. I hope you are prepared for how special it will be. The repetition felt like a warning disguised as enthusiasm. Victoria peered beside him, practically vibrating with barely contained excitement as she guided me through their foyer toward the sounds of conversation in the living room. Everyone is so eager to celebrate with you tonight, she said, her voice bright with false cheer. We have such wonderful surprises planned. As we entered the living room, I was struck by the sheer number of people who had gathered for our anniversary dinner. What I had planned as an intimate celebration for close family and friends had somehow evolved into a much larger affair. Extended family members I barely knew, business associates of Richard's, and neighbors who had never shown interest in our marriage filled the elegant space. But more unsettling than the size of the crowd was their behavior. Instead of the warm congratulations and cheerful toasts I expected, guests offered condolences like comments and embraces that felt more like farewells than celebrations. My cousin Michael, usually boisterous at family gatherings, seemed subdued and kept avoiding eye contact when he spoke to me. Congratulations, Rebecca, he said quietly. I hope tonight brings you everything you deserve. Everything I deserved. Why did that sound less like a blessing and more like a threat as the Henderson from down the street offered unusually elaborate compliments that sounded rehearsed? Rebecca, dear, you look absolutely radiant tonight. So brave, so dignified. I have always admired your strength. Brave, dignified. These were not words typically associated with anniversary celebrations. These were words reserved for people facing adversity with grace. Throughout the cocktail hour, I caught glimpses of meaningful exchanges between guests when they thought I was not observing. Raised eyebrows, subtle nods, whispered conversations that ceased abruptly when I approached. The social fabric of the party felt charged with information that everyone possessed except me. Jake moved through the crowd like a man condemned, drinking more heavily than I had ever seen him drink at a family gathering. He maintained careful physical distance from me, avoiding the casual touches and shared glances that normally characterized our public interactions. When guests asked about our marriage or future plans, his responses were vague and quickly redirected to safer topics. I watched him check his watch obsessively, as if he were waiting for a specific moment to arrive. His conversations with Richard always ended abruptly when I approached, their whispered exchanges carrying an urgency that made my stomach clench with apprehension. Jake, I whispered during a brief moment when we found ourselves alone in the kitchen. What is wrong with you tonight? You are acting like you are attending a funeral rather than our anniversary party. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to hold apologies for crimes not yet committed. Rebecca, I just want you to know that none of this was personal. None of this was because you are not a good person. None of what was not personal, Jake. You are scaring me. But before he could respond, Victoria appeared in the doorway with the announcement that dinner was ready to be served. As we moved into the dining room, I noticed that the seating arrangement had been changed from what I had planned. Instead of sitting beside Jake as the anniversary couple should, I found myself placed directly across from an empty chair that seemed to be waiting for someone who had not yet arrived. We have one more guest joining us, Richard explained when I questioned the arrangement. Someone very special who will complete our little family gathering. The dining room looked spectacular under the soft glow of the chandelier I had spent an hour cleaning to perfection. The good china gleamed. Crystal glasses caught the light and sent tiny rainbows dancing across the pristine white tablecloth, and fresh flowers filled every surface with the scent of roses and baby's breath. But instead of feeling proud of the beautiful setting I had helped create, I felt like I was viewing the stage for my own public execution. Grace took her seat beside me, her presence the only thing keeping me anchored in reality. She clutched her purse with protective intensity, her fingers tracing the outline of what I assumed was an envelope. Throughout the cocktail hour, she had watched the proceedings with the sharp attention of someone gathering intelligence rather than enjoying a party. "Are you ready for this?" she whispered as servers began bringing the first course. "Ready for what?" I whispered back. But she just squeezed my hand and fixed her gaze on Richard, who was rising from his seat with the theatrical authority of someone about to make an important announcement. The room fell silent as he commanded attention from every guest at the elegantly set table. In that moment, surrounded by crystal and china and flowers I had arranged with such care, I finally understood that I was not the host of this celebration. I was its target. The storm was about to break, and I had nowhere to run. Richard cleared his throat with the practiced authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. The dining room fell completely silent. Even the soft classical music that had been playing in the background seemed to fade away. 45 pairs of eyes focused on him with the intense anticipation of an audience waiting for the main performance to begin. "Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends," he began, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering a verdict that had already been decided. "We have gathered tonight not just to mark Rebecca and Jake's second anniversary, but to address some very important family matters." A chill ran down my spine as the words settled over the room like a shroud. This was not the warm anniversary toast I had expected. This was something else entirely. Richard reached into his jacket pocket with theatrical precision, producing an envelope that looked official and ominous in the candlelight. He held it high enough for everyone to see, like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. "Marriage," he continued, his gaze settling on me with uncomfortable intensity, "is an institution with specific purposes. When those purposes are not fulfilled after a reasonable period of time, difficult decisions must be made for the good of all involved parties." My mouth went dry. The dessert fork trembled in my hand as I set it down on the china plate with a soft clink that seemed to echo through the sudden tension. "Rebecca, my dear," Richard said, and his endearment felt like a blade wrapped in silk. "You have been part of our family for exactly 2 years. That represents adequate time to evaluate the success of this union and make necessary adjustments for the future." Jake stood frozen beside his father's chair, his face pale as parchment, his eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond my shoulder. He looked like a man standing before a firing squad, except he was not the one about to be executed. "Since you could not provide us with an heir," Richard continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "here, take this anniversary gift." The envelope materialized before me, held steady by Richard's confident hand. Around the table, I could hear sharp intakes of breath from some guests, while others leaned forward with the morbid fascination of spectators at a public execution. My hands shook as I accepted the envelope. The paper felt expensive, substantial, weighted with importance that I was only beginning to understand. The return address was embossed with the logo of a law firm I did not recognize. "Open it, Rebecca," Victoria urged from across the table, her voice bright with barely contained excitement. "We are all so eager to see your reaction." The envelope seemed to grow heavier in my trembling hands. Part of me wanted to set it down unopened, to preserve for just a few more moments the illusion that my life was not about to change irrevocably. But 45 pairs of eyes were watching me, waiting for my response to whatever lay inside. I tore open the seal with fingers that felt disconnected from my body. The legal documents inside were crisp and formal, their official letterhead making everything feel suddenly, terrifyingly real. "Petition for dissolution of marriage," I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. The formal legal language could not disguise the brutal reality of what I was holding. Jake had met with attorneys. He had filed paperwork. He had planned my abandonment with the same methodical precision that other couples used to plan vacations. "Jake," I looked up at my husband. desperate for some sign that this was an elaborate, cruel joke, that he would step forward and explain that this was all a misunderstanding. Instead, he remained frozen beside his father, his silence speaking louder than any confession could have. "There is more, Rebecca," Victoria announced with the enthusiasm of someone unveiling the second act of an entertaining performance. "We would like you to meet someone very special." A young woman stepped forward from where she had been standing near the dining room doorway. I recognized her immediately, Amber from the grocery store, the nervous coworker who had known about our anniversary party. But tonight she was not nervous. Tonight she was dressed in a blue silk dress that complemented her complexion perfectly, her hair styled with professional precision. "Rebecca," Victoria continued with barely concealed glee, "I would like you to meet Amber, Jake's fiancée. They plan to marry as soon as the divorce is finalized." The words hit me like physical blows. Fiancé? They were already engaged while I was still legally married to him. The betrayal had layers I was only beginning to understand. I looked at Amber more carefully now, noting details that had escaped me during our grocery store encounter. She was wearing earrings that looked familiar, delicate pearl drops that I suddenly recognized as belonging to Jake's grandmother. Family heirlooms that had been promised to me were already adorning my replacement. "We wanted you to meet her properly," Richard explained with the tone of someone conducting a business transaction, "so there would be no confusion about the arrangements moving forward. Amber comes from an excellent family, and she has already proven her ability to conceive." Proven her ability to conceive. The words echoed in my mind as I stared at this young woman who was apparently superior to me in the only way that mattered to this family. "The papers just need your signature, Rebecca." Jake finally spoke, his voice strained. "I have already signed them. We can make this easy for everyone." Easy for everyone. As if there was an easy way to have your marriage dissolved in front of an audience of family and friends. As if there was an easy way to discover that your husband had been planning your replacement while you were arranging flowers for your anniversary celebration. Around the table, guests shifted in their seats with the uncomfortable energy of people witnessing something they knew was wrong but felt powerless to stop. Some avoided eye contact entirely, while others watched with the fascination of spectators at a particularly dramatic theater performance. The pen that Richard offered me felt impossibly heavy, weighted with the finality by what I was being asked to do. Through tears that made the legal documents blur before my eyes, I signed my name on the designated line. The pen scratched across the paper with finality, each letter of my signature sealing my fate and ending my marriage in the most public, humiliating way possible. The room erupted in relieved cheers and congratulations for Jake, as if my pain was the price of admission to their celebration. But the cheers died instantly when Grace stood up. Her face transformed from shock into something far more dangerous. Cold, calculated fury. "Since we are exchanging gifts," Grace announced, her voice slicing through the celebration with surgical precision, "I have one as well." The shift in the room's energy was immediate and electric. Guests who had been raising their glasses in toast to Jake and Amber now turned toward Grace with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. Richard, still basking in the afterglow of his successful orchestration of my humiliation, looked annoyed at this unexpected interruption. "Grace, dear," Victoria began, her tone carrying the patronizing sweetness she reserved for people she considered beneath her attention. "How lovely that you want to participate, but I think we have had enough excitement for one evening." "Oh, I disagree completely," Grace replied, her smile sharp as a blade. "I think this evening is just getting started." She reached into her purse with deliberate slowness, withdrawing the envelope she had been protecting all night. But instead of handing it to me, as I had expected, she walked directly to Richard's end of the table. The symbolism was not lost on anyone in the room. She was challenging the patriarch directly, meeting power with power. "This envelope contains information that I believe will interest you greatly," Grace said, holding the document just out of Richard's reach. "Information about your daughter-in-law that might have influenced your decision-making tonight. Had you bothered to gather all the facts before proceeding with this performance?" Richard's confidence faltered for the first time again all evening. "Young lady, I do not know what game you think you are playing, but—" "No game," Grace interrupted, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Just truth," something that seems to be in short supply in this family. She placed the envelope on the table directly in front of Richard, her movements deliberate and controlled. Open it. The room held its collective breath as Richard reached for the envelope with hands that were no longer quite steady. His earlier theatrical confidence was beginning to crack, replaced by the first stirrings of uncertainty. He tore open the seal and withdrew the single sheet of paper inside. I watched his face as he read, witnessing a transformation that was both terrible and satisfying. The color drained from his cheeks as if someone had opened a valve and let all the blood run out of his body. His triumphant smile dissolved like sugar in rain, replaced by an expression of dawning horror. "What does it say?" Victoria demanded, her voice sharp with anxiety as she watched her husband's face crumble. Richard's hands began to tremble, the paper rustling like autumn leaves in a windstorm. His eyes darted between the medical report and my tear-streaked face, his mind clearly struggling to process the magnitude of what he had just done. "It is a pregnancy test," he whispered, the words barely audible above the suddenly oppressive silence in the room. "Rebecca is pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Not the expectant quiet of an audience waiting for the next act, but the hollow silence of a tomb. Guests who had been celebrating moments before now stared in shock and growing horror as the implications of the evening's events began to sink in. "Positive," Grace clarified, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned quiet. "Confirmed by blood test 48 hours ago, Rebecca is carrying your grandchild. Richard, the heir you claim she could never provide." I found my voice then, drawing strength from somewhere deep inside myself that I had not known existed. Through my tears and heartbreak, I summoned every ounce of dignity I had left and spoke with a clarity that surprised even me. "Congratulations," I said, looking directly at Richard with eyes that no longer held submission or desperate desire for his approval. "You just gave away your grandchild." The power shift in the room was immediate and complete. Richard, who had commanded the evening with such authoritative confidence, now looked like a man facing his own execution. The signed divorce papers that had represented his victory moments before now became evidence of his devastating miscalculation. "Rebecca," he stammered, his voice breaking on my name. "Rebecca, we did not know. We had no idea. Surely we can—" "Can what?" I asked, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Can undo the papers I just signed in front of 45 witnesses, can pretend this evening never happened, can take back the humiliation you orchestrated for your own entertainment." Jake finally found his voice, stepping forward with his hands outstretched in a gesture that was both pleading and pathetic. "Rebecca, please, we can work this out. The papers do not have to be filed. We can tear them up right now." "Work what out, Jake?" I asked. And the irony of the situation was so sharp it was almost funny. "Work out our marriage that you have already legally dissolved. Work out your relationship with Amber, who is wearing your grandmother's earrings and planning to move into our house." Amber, who had been standing beside Victoria like a trophy on display, now looked like she wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. The triumph she had worn so confidently moments before had evaporated, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that she had participated in the destruction of a pregnant woman's marriage. "This is all a misunderstanding," Victoria interjected, her voice rising with desperate pitch. "An unfortunate timing issue. We can make this right. You can what?" Grace interrupted, her fury now fully unleashed. "You can undo the legal documents. You can erase the public humiliation. You can magically transform this celebration back into what Rebecca thought it was." Richard was now openly begging, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. "Rebecca, please, you must understand. We thought we were doing what was best for everyone. We thought—" "You thought wrong," I said simply. "You thought you could dispose of me like defective merchandise and replace me with a newer model. You thought you could orchestrate my humiliation for your entertainment. You thought you could destroy my life without consequences." The legal reality of the signed documents was sinking in around the room. Even if I wanted to forgive this betrayal, even if I wanted to attempt reconciliation, the divorce papers created a legal barrier that could not be simply wished away. "The papers are signed," I continued, my voice steady despite the tears still streaming down my face. "The marriage is over. And your grandchild will never know the family that threw him away before he was even born. The celebration that had begun with such cruel joy was now awake, mourning the death of relationships and possibilities that could never be resurrected. But I was done being the object of their scrutiny, done being the victim of their entertainment. Grace appeared at my side as if summoned by some invisible signal, her arms sliding through mine with protective determination. "Come on," she whispered, her voice gentle but firm. "We are leaving." "Rebecca, please," Jake called out as I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the sudden chaos. "We can fix this. We can make this right." I turned to look at him one last time, this man who had shared my bed and my dreams and my morning coffee ritual. His face was pale with panic, his hands reaching toward me in a gesture that was 2 years too late. "Fix what?" "Jake," I asked, my voice steady despite the tears that continued to flow. "Fix the legal documents I signed in front of everyone. We know. Fix the humiliation you orchestrated. Fix the fact that you replaced me before you even divorced me." He had no answer for that. None of them did. Richard stumbled to his feet, his chair toppling backward in his haste. "Rebecca, you have to understand. We made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But we can correct this. The papers do not have to be filed. We can tear them up right now." "And then what?" I asked, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Pretend this evening never happened. Pretend you did not just publicly humiliate me for the entertainment of our family and friends. Pretend Amber is not standing there wearing your mother's jewelry and planning to move into my house." Victoria stepped forward, her face flushed with desperation. "Rebecca, dear, you must be reasonable. Families have misunderstandings. This can all be worked out. Think about the baby. Think about what is best for your child." The audacity of her words stopped me cold. "What is best for my child," I repeated slowly, "is to never know the family that threw him away before he was even born." With Grace's steady presence beside me, I walked toward the dining room exit, leaving behind the crystal and china and carefully arranged flowers that had once represented my hopes for acceptance and belonging. My steps were measured and deliberate, each one carrying me further away from the life I had thought I wanted. "Rebecca," Richard's voice cracked as he called after me. "You cannot do this. You cannot take our grandchild away from us." I paused at the threshold, turning back one final time to address the people who had just destroyed my world with such calculated precision. "I am not taking your grandchild away from you," I said clearly. "You gave him away when you handed me those divorce papers." The arguing voices and desperate pleading followed us through the front hallway, but they grew fainter with each step we took toward the door. Guests who had come expecting to celebrate an anniversary now found themselves witnesses to the complete implosion of a family, and I could hear their uncomfortable murmurs mixing with the increasingly frantic protests from Jake and his parents. The cool night air hit my face like a blessing as Grace and I stepped onto the front porch. After the suffocating atmosphere of betrayal and cruelty inside the Blackwell house, the October evening felt clean and purifying. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with air that did not carry the weight of disappointment and judgment. "Do not look back," Grace whispered as she guided me toward her car parked at the curb. "Do not give them the satisfaction of seeing you hesitate." I kept my eyes fixed forward, focused on the red taillights of cars lining the street, on the porch lights of neighboring houses where other families were probably enjoying normal Tuesday evenings without drama or betrayal or public humiliation. With each step away from that house, I felt something lifting from my shoulders, a weight I had carried for so long and I had forgotten what it felt like to walk without it. Behind us, the front door opened and Jake's voice carried across the yard. "Rebecca, please do not do this." But I was already climbing into Grace's passenger seat, already closing the door on that chapter of my life with a firm click that felt more final than any divorce papers could. Grace started the engine and pulled away from the curb with careful precision, her driving unusually slow and deliberate. In the safety of her car, surrounded by the familiar scent of her vanilla perfume and the soft jazz music playing on her radio, I finally allowed myself to completely fall apart. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside me, the kind of crying that involves your entire body and leaves you gasping for breath between waves of grief. 2 years of marriage, someone 2 years of trying to earn approval that was never going to come. 2 years of believing I was building something permanent with someone who was secretly planning my replacement. Let it out, Grace said softly, reaching across to squeeze my hand while keeping her eyes on the road. Let it all out. You have been holding this in for months. She was right, Oimifru. I had been carrying the weight of a failing marriage, absorbing the criticism and disappointment of Jake's family, making excuses for behavior that should have been inexcusable. The relief of finally releasing all that suppressed pain was almost as overwhelming as the pain itself. I cannot believe they did that to you, Grace said, her voice shaking with fury. I cannot believe they planned that whole performance. It was cruel beyond anything I could have imagined. Through my tears, I managed to speak. You saved me, Grace. If you had not been there with those test results, if you had not stood up to them, you would have found another way, she replied firmly. You are stronger than they ever gave you credit for, stronger than you gave yourself credit for. As we drove through our quiet suburban neighborhood, past houses where lights glowed warmly in kitchen windows, and families were probably settling in for normal evenings together, I began to feel something unexpected stirring alongside my grief. It was relief, pure and simple. The marriage that had been slowly suffocating me was over. The constant pressure to earn approval from people who would never accept me was finished. The pretense that we were building something beautiful together could finally be abandoned. Where do you want to go? Grace asked as we approached the intersection that would take us either to my house or hers. Home, I said without hesitation. I want to go home. The house that Jake and I had shared looked different as Grace pulled into the driveway. The porch light I had left burning cast familiar shadows across the front yard, but something fundamental had shifted. This was no longer the home I shared with my husband. This was simply my house, the place where I would raise my child and build whatever came next. The months that followed my escape from the Blackwell anniversary disaster were unlike anything I had experienced during my marriage. Freed from the constant stress of trying to earn approval that would never come, my body responded to pregnancy with remarkable resilience. Dr. Patterson commented during each appointment about how much healthier and more relaxed I appeared. Whatever changes you have made in your Siam, she said during my 5-month checkup, they are working beautifully. Your blood pressure is perfect. Your weight gain is exactly on track. And honestly, you just look radiant. The pregnancy became a celebration rather than a source of anxiety. Grace organized a baby shower that filled my living room with genuine friends who offered support without conditions. My mother moved in to help prepare for the baby, painting the nursery in soft yellow and green, creating a sanctuary that felt warm and welcoming rather than pressured by expectations. When Jake attempted to contact me through various channels during those months, my lawyer made it clear that the divorce proceedings would continue as planned and that he had no legal claim to involvement in my pregnancy. The signed papers from that devastating evening had created an ironclad barrier that protected both me and my child from further interference. The most satisfying part of my recovery was watching the Blackwell family empire crumble from a distance. Grace had done more than just collect my pregnancy test results during her investigation. Her work as a forensic accountant had uncovered a web of financial irregularities in Richard's real estate business that she quietly reported to federal authorities. 3 months after the anniversary party, FBI agents raided the Blackwell offices and froze their assets pending investigation into tax evasion, money laundering, and fraud. Richard's carefully constructed image as a pillar of the community crumbled overnight when local newspapers published details of his illegal activities. Victoria's social standing collapsed along with the family finances. The woman who had once looked down on me as unworthy of their name found herself ostracized by the same social circles she had once dominated. Country club memberships were revoked, charity board positions disappeared, and invitations to exclusive events stopped arriving. Jake, stripped of his position in the family business and facing his own legal troubles as an accomplice to his father's schemes, was forced to find work at a car dealership. The man who had once dismissed my middle-class background now struggled to maintain even that level of comfort. Amber, discovering that her meal ticket came with federal criminal charges, quickly distanced herself from the Blackwell family. The engagement that had seemed so triumphant at the anniversary party quietly dissolved when she realized that marrying into a family under federal investigation was not the social advancement she had envisioned. Labor began on a Tuesday morning in late spring, nearly 8 months after the anniversary party, that had changed everything. Grace and my mother flanked my hospital bed, offering encouragement and support through each contraction. The delivery room filled with love and anticipation. But it was love freely given, rather than love conditional on performance or biological success. When my son finally arrived, healthy, beautiful, and perfect, I felt a completeness that had never existed during my marriage. Holding him for the first time, I understood that this was what unconditional love felt like, not the desperate scrambling for approval that had characterized my relationship with Jake's family, but simple, pure acceptance of another human being exactly as they were. "He is gorgeous," Grace whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the baby I had named David Grace Miller. "Absolutely perfect." The middle name honored the friendship that had saved me during my darkest hour, ensuring that my son would always carry a reminder of what true loyalty looked like. David would grow up knowing that the most important relationships in life were chosen rather than assigned by biology or marriage certificates. The hospital room filled with flowers and gifts from people who celebrated his arrival without reservation. My mother's church friends, Grace's coworkers, neighbors who had watched my marriage crumble and wanted to support my new beginning. None of them questioned his worth based on bloodlines or family heritage. They simply welcomed a new life into the world with joy. Jake and his family made no attempt to contact me after David's birth, apparently understanding that the bridge between us had been permanently burned. The legal documents that had once represented my humiliation now served as protection, ensuring that my son would never be subjected to the conditional love and constant evaluation that had made my own life with them so miserable. As David grew from infant to toddler, our small house became a sanctuary of laughter, encase, and unconditional acceptance. Grace served as his honorary aunt, spoiling him with attention and gifts while helping me navigate the challenges of single motherhood. My mother extended her visit indefinitely, claiming she had never been happier than when she was helping raise her grandson. The three women who had once been excluded from Jake's family vision of the future created something infinitely more valuable, a chosen family built on love rather than obligation, support rather than judgment, acceptance rather than performance metrics. Now, 5 years later, I sit in my backyard garden watching David chase butterflies with the fearless enthusiasm of a 6-year-old who has never known rejection. His laughter fills the air as he discovers new flowers and interesting insects, his world expanding with each day in an environment where curiosity is celebrated rather than controlled. The pain of betrayal has faded into something I never expected: gratitude. Jake and his family's cruelty had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible. They had forced me to discover my own strength, to build a support system based on genuine care rather than biological obligation, to raise my child without the toxic pressures that had nearly destroyed my own sense of worth. David knows nothing of the grandparents who rejected him before birth. He knows only the love of his mother, his chosen grandmother who reads him stories every night, and his honorary aunt who brings him new books and toys with delightful regularity. His foundation is built on acceptance rather than conditions, celebration rather than evaluation. The business I started from my home during those early months of single motherhood has grown into a successful marketing consultancy. Financial independence came gradually but surely, built on my own merits rather than inherited wealth or family connections. The skills I had developed trying to please the Blackwells, attention to detail, social grace, strategic thinking, proved far more valuable in the professional world than in their suffocating family dynamics. Last month, Grace brought me a newspaper article about Richard's sentencing. 5 years in federal prison for financial crimes. His business empire completely dissolved. His reputation destroyed beyond repair. Victoria had moved to a small apartment in a different state, supported by Social Security and whatever savings had escaped federal seizure. Jake had remarried, this time to a woman closer to his own age who seemed content with his diminished circumstances. The wedding announcement in the local paper showed a small, modest ceremony, a far cry from the elaborate social events the Blackwells had once hosted. Reading about their continued struggles, I felt not satisfaction, but something closer to indifference. Their ability to hurt me had died the night Grace stood up to them with my pregnancy test results. They had become irrelevant to my happiness, powerless to affect the life I had built without them. "Mommy, look," David called out, running toward me with a handful of dandelions he had picked from our lawn. "I got you flowers." I accepted his gift with the same joy I would have shown for the most expensive bouquet. This was what love looked like, spontaneous, generous, uncomplicated by expectations or conditions. They are beautiful, sweetheart, I said, pulling him onto my lap for a hug. Thank you for thinking of me. As he settled against me, chattering about his plans to build a fort in the oak tree at the back of our yard, I realized that the revenge I had achieved was not calculated or vindictive. It was simply the natural consequence of living well, of choosing love over obligation, of raising a child who would never question his worth based on other people's approval. Jake's family had wanted an heir to carry on their legacy. Instead, they had created the beginning of mine, a legacy built on kindness, acceptance, and the radical idea that love should never require auditions. Watching David play in our garden, I understood that their cruelty had set me free to become the person I was always meant to be. They had given me divorce papers as an anniversary gift, never imagining that those papers would become my liberation. The best revenge, as it turned out, was simply living well. And we were living very well indeed. Sometimes, in quiet moments like these, I think about that terrifying night when my world collapsed in front of 45 witnesses. At the time, it felt like the end of everything I had worked for and dreamed of. Now I see it as the beginning of everything I actually needed. Grace was right that night when she whispered that I was stronger than anyone gave me credit for. I just needed to discover that strength for myself. The Blackwells did me a favor by showing me exactly who they were before I wasted any more years trying to earn their acceptance. David will grow up knowing his worth is not dependent on anyone else's approval. He will understand that family is something you build with people who choose to love you, not something you are born into and must earn through performance. That is the legacy I am leaving him, the knowledge that he is enough, exactly as he is, and that anyone who thinks otherwise is not worthy of his time or energy. The sun is setting over our garden now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. David has abandoned his butterfly hunt in favor of helping me water the vegetables we planted last spring. Our small patch of earth is thriving under our care, producing tomatoes and peppers and herbs that will fill our kitchen with the sense of abundance. This is what happiness looks like, I think. Watching my son carefully direct the garden hose toward a row of carrots. Not the performance of happiness that I once maintained for the Blackwells, but the real thing, quiet, steady, earned through hard choices and brave moments, and the willingness to walk away from people who mistake cruelty for strength. The divorce papers that once represented my humiliation now hang framed in my home office, a reminder of the night that changed everything. Not as a monument to pain, but as proof that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you turns out to be exactly what you needed all along. David looks up at me from his watering duties, his face bright with the satisfaction of a job well done. Is this enough water, Mommy? Perfect. I tell him then, and I mean it. Everything about this moment, this life, this choice to love without conditions, it is all absolutely perfect.